We're back. I'm Renee, and I'm an alcoholic. And I just have to say, this is so hard for me to talk about all these things in the short amount of time. So please, if we say or you have questions or get our numbers, talk to us after. It's just impossible to fit it all in. But it's funny, whoever laughed at us we have different communication skills, very, very different. And one of the most beautiful things that sobriety has given us is the open-mindedness to continue to learn, right? Like if I just put my heels in the sand and say this is the way, and this ties into unity, which we're going to talk about now. And I'll do 15 and he'll do 15. But, like I had to learn, I had to learn. I'm saying one thing, he's not hearing that, and if we look at the tradition, so the steps are recovery, the traditions are for our groups, right? Traditions were written because Bill started to see that all these little pockets of AA were popping up all over the country, and if you can imagine, you have one group with 4 people, and then you have to go 3 other states to get to another little gathering, which there weren't meeting houses or clubs. It was in their kitchens, right? And so, anyway, they were trying to create AA, and they were having some problems. It's kind of like my family, right? Our marriage. We're trying to do something we've never done before. We want to have a good marriage. We want to have a healthy and beautiful spiritual marriage. We've never done that before. So you can apply these traditions. We've done this a couple times with couples, and we've applied, done groups where we would study the traditions in relationships and home groups and our home group. If you haven't done this, we're going to talk about what's the difference between a meeting and a group. I'll let John talk more of the technical part of that, but, do a group inventory, find out if those traditions are alive and kicking in your home groups, and are your singleness of purpose, everything, look at it, see where you can get better, and that's what we do in our relationship. We do that in our marriage. I've done that with my children. I have one daughter, my middle child, she, I used to drive her to the barn every day. And this is a small example, but this is the kind of stuff I like to give you something in my life, not just read from a pamphlet. She was in high school and she finally got her driver's license. And for years since she was 8 years old, she's ridden horses, and I would drive her to the barn every day because those horses have to be taken care of every day. So that was our time together from the time she was 8 till about 16. And she's the middle child, so it was good for us, and that was our time together. Well, she gets her driver's license, and she doesn't need me to drive her to the barn anymore, right? And so I lose that time with her, and so finally, I'm feeling that, my other daughter and I go to the gym all the time together. My son and I have our own special relationship. I take him to Boy Scouts, and him and I do our own thing. There was time with him. And I just started to realize this, so I prayed. I had some discernment with it, and so it dawned on me. She liked to watch this stupid show, The Bachelor. I don't want to watch The Bachelor, and so I said,
don't want you to watch The Bachelor.
Right? But I said, hey, once a week, if I sit with my daughter and watch The Bachelor, and I'll pick a special dessert for her and I to share, and and that's what we did. We would get together once a week, and that was our time, and the other kids didn't want to watch it either, so it was really just her and I, and it was things like that. That's a small example, but you gotta not just keep, what can I ask God to give me, The Bachelor, okay, that's what came to me. I don't know what it's going to look like. It wasn't my first choice, but her and I still talk about that. She's an adult criminal defense attorney, and she'll still laugh with me about those Bachelor episodes that we watch together, and so I don't know what it's going to look like, and that's the thing. I can get rid of an old idea and let God give me a new one. I'm going to have a spiritual experience. So all right, so I got sober at a club. I didn't hear much about home groups, right? I didn't know really kind of what that was, and I'll share with the girls here. So for me, the years that I was raising my kids, I got to live out my dream. I got to be a stay-at-home mom. I worked in the medical field. I worked as a registered medical assistant. By the third child, John and I did the math and decided that, I could stay home with the kids because really, you got to make a certain amount of money to be able to put 3 kids in daycare. So I got to live the dream, and it was best years of my life so far. And I got to raise my kids. And so home group night, if I picked a home group, let's say I picked Tuesday night, and then the football schedule came out, and football's on Tuesday night, or, Saturdays, the football games and the horseback riding competition, and then wrestling season comes in, and now it's Wednesday night is practice night, and then softball season came out, and my daughter's, playing state level softball, and we've got every night here and there. And then one year we tried travel. That didn't work out too great. But, it was like, how could I commit to a home group and get that service position? But my sobriety had to come first. So I had to figure that out. So for all those years, I didn't have a home group, but I went to some summers. I would go to the early bird meeting, and I would get up and go to the 6:00 early bird meeting, and before John even went to work, and be back when the kids were still asleep. So I had the summer with my kids, still had my meetings, still went regularly. My sponsor gave me the suggestion, try to go to as many of the same nights so people can get to know you. And this was before Zoom. I mean, I didn't even have that option. But, I had to, I made it work, but not at the expense of missing anything with my kids. I didn't miss a wrestling match. I didn't miss a Boy Scout thing. I didn't miss it. I found ways to get my meetings, make my connections. I did other service things, like something like this going on. If there was a way I could show up and that I knew that I could do that, I would do that with, tons of energy, whatever I could do. I would go down. I know another way. So the hotline at the intergroup, the phone, they had different time slots you could go in, and the girls went to school right across the street from the intergroup office. So I just would go a couple hours early and sit in the office, wait to pick up the kids from school. All those things, because I didn't believe that God got me sober to miss out on those. My kids didn't have to pay the price for that. Now you have to watch that. My sponsor really kept an eye, and I had to have some accountability, because you can get lost there and say, well, my kid, And another big example of that was a girl called me crying one night. I wasn't her sponsor, but her sponsor had told her that she still had to go to that service commitment, and her daughter had a fever of like 105, and her husband was afraid, and the baby was really sick. And I said, absolutely, come on, please, that you got it. You can do it all. I believe that you can do it all. You can have it all. How's your prayer life? Are you going to the noon meeting maybe while all the kids are at school? It might not be your favorite meeting. Or are you doing that? That kind of thing. So there are times in sobriety where I've had to shuffle things to stay on the beam, but all that can get done, with God's help, not my help, but, God has all power. There's a line in there, if you stick close to him and perform his work well, we don't tire as easily. You can do it all. If I'm relying on God, if I rely on my own power by 8:00 in the morning, I have nothing left, But anyway, so that, so we've been in meetings, we've been in groups, but one of our biggest things that we advocate for are getting a part of a group, not just a meeting. A place where when I go to, I can sit down and I can breathe. Like I call it sliding into home. There's all different flavors of meetings. There's all different, formats, and, but is there a place that you can go to for an hour? It was so important, still important for me. I still walk into our home group in Lebanon, Tennessee, and I just feel like I can breathe a little easier. And this is 33 years later. But I remember in the meeting, in the beginning, just needing an hour to feel safe. I couldn't really let anyone sit behind me. I had a problem with people on my back. I would still, but I had to learn how to let a woman, sit behind me in a meeting and watch my back, and those were real lessons that I had to learn. Somewhere I felt safe for an hour. So, what's the difference between a meeting and a group? I'm going to let John explain all that, but, find a place where you feel at home that you feel a part of. I don't know about you, but there are some people in a meeting that you can just sit down next to and not say a word to, but you just your shoulders kind of go down, and that person just illuminates that. You just kind of like sitting next to them. They don't even have to talk to you, and I had a lot of people like that in my early sobriety, and so that's what I try to do today. They come in, everyone's just so, with the day on them, and it's like, just, come on and sit down. And, that's why I don't like to save seats in meetings. I know all sounds stupid. I can't, but if someone says, hey, is someone sitting there, and you say, oh yes, this is for Lisa, is Lisa more important than that girl that just is looking for a seat in an AA room? I invite you to look at that. Do we save seats, and do we make that person feel comfortable that they're important enough for that seat? So I'm going to let John talk more technical stuff.
I'm not sure about anything technical, but maybe she means more opinionated. That I certainly have, and hopefully some experience. I too, like Renee, got sober in AA club, and in that particular county, there was no vernacular in AA of the home group. I'm not that bright, but I'm not that dense. Like, I would have heard it in 18 years. And then we moved north to a county that was part of the vernacular, and by then I've got my opinions, and they'd vote on stuff, but you can only vote if you're a home group member. I'm like, well, screw you, I'm an AA, I can vote. And they're like, is this your home group? So I had an opinion, not an educated one, but I had an opinion. And then I got hooked up with my sponsor that I have now, and he got me schooled up. And I had this, just a little side note, I had really one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life. So every year I started, my sponsor that I got hooked up with, that I went through the steps with, that really helped me find a spiritual awakening. Every summer I'd come down, I'd pick up my AA chip, because our birthday dates are about a week apart. We'd pick up our chips together and we'd hang out and go fishing. Anyways, this one year he called me and he said, hey, I messed up the schedule. Tom Iversor's doing workshops all week. I can't, this is not a good weekend. And I was like, sounds like a good weekend to me. And so I came and I got to hang out with this guy, Tom I, who was a big traditions guy. And his kind of dying legacy he's, I think, 55 or 60 years sober when he died, 63 years sober, I think, when he died, was about forming 3 legacy groups. Like, he knew that was the difference of AA's future and not. And so when you talk about the technical, and so all week that I was with him, he just hammered that on me. He was like, hey, tell me about your home group. And I was like, oh, tell me about your area. Tell me about your groups. I was like, oh man, there's some really good meetings. He's like, no, tell me about your groups. And he said the most profound thing I've heard in this conversation. He said, what makes our home group special is what we do in between the meetings. All right? I mean, you can go to a clubhouse like this. I don't know anything about this clubhouse. And I'm sure it's hit or miss. I bet there's some good meetings, and I bet there's some crappy meetings, right? And we can control what happens within a meeting by forming a home group. And so if this is life and death to you, like it is to me, I have to have a solid home group. I can't any longer take this chance of, well, I hope it's a good meeting, right? I mean, for a long time, my sobriety was really contingent on the quality of the meeting. My spiritual condition was meeting-based. If the meeting was good, I was making it through that day pretty good. If somebody shared something awful, heartbreaking, I'd leave with a little gratitude. Whew, that's not me. That didn't happen to me. Or someone shared something really uplifting, I'd be like, all right, maybe that's for me too. But if the meeting was just I was kind of and that's terrible recipe for recovery. And so Tom taught me how to be a part of a home group, how to form a home group. And he told me, it's really difficult to change the path of a meeting, especially if it's established. He said, why don't you start your own home group? Get a couple of like-minded individuals enough people that want the same type of group, not meeting. It's not, it's not that difficult to organize a good meeting, although sometimes you'd think so. But it's really not that hard. He said, find some people that you want to be in a group with. In other words, those other 23 hours of the day, not that meeting hour, that want to have the same type of meeting, that believe in the traditions, that believe in recovery, that believe in service and unity. And, get 3, 4, 5, 6 people and get them to get a couple people, and before you know it, you've got a group. And then divvy up the service positions and then be committed to following the traditions, and the rest will just happen. And that's proven true for us. We did that in Maryland. We got together with a bunch of people that wanted, we used to have this big book study at our house, and it was so wonderful. It was such a close-knit group, such a intimate experience. We were like, hey, let's form a group out of this. And some people wanted to start a new group, some didn't, and we started this group with that basis. We had all the service positions covered first. We had a GSR first, a treasurer, a group format. And, I'm a seeker, and I talked to a lot of people about different formats of the meeting part. Like, if we only get an hour, and our life and death really depends on this hour, how do we format this hour? Because the litmus test is there a group in your area where when a guy says, hey, I need to go to my very first, I say guy, gal, my very first AA meeting, where do I go? Where are you going to send them? You're going to send them to the 50-50 meeting? That you're not sure it might be a good meeting, it might not be a good meeting. He might leave with a big book, he might not leave with a big book. Somebody might reach out their hand to him, somebody might need, those are chances that I can't play. And so I am responsible, as our responsibility statement says, that I'm responsible that when someone reaches out the hand to AA, I want the hand to AA always to be there. And so I'm responsible for being a part of a group, not running a group, not managing my group. My home group won't even give me a damn job to make the coffee. So I have no authority in that group, right? But be a part of a group, be responsible for a group, that when the coffee's not made, I go make it. That when, I put $5 in the basket. If I don't have $5, I look at the guy, give me $5. I put $5 in the basket, not $1, right? Put $5 in the basket. If the chairs aren't set up, I set up the chairs. I'm responsible for that group, and a format that was shared that has seemed to work in the last 20, 30 years for us is because and then we moved. So that happened in Frederick, and this awesome group started, still going. And then we came down here, and we ended up in Lebanon, Tennessee. And there's a lot of meetings, a lot of recovery. This may sound arrogant. I don't mean it to be. A lot of recovery trying to happen. A lot of recovery bumping their heads. A lot of different meetings, a couple different clubhouses, a zillion new people, halfway houses. I mean, I could name 200 spots that they have, probably in halfway houses and sober living. And so, and it's an area where, Tennessee, as you guys know, a lot of people have moved here in the last 5 years. I'm sorry, we've done our best to ruin your state. And Lebanon's the same way. And so we had a lot of transplant out of state, long-term sobriety. And we'd go to these meetings that were not a group. And what happens is in a meeting that's not a group, that's not well invested, you guys know what that looks like sometimes. It's 2 minutes before the meeting. Who's chairing the meeting? I don't know. Is it Sally's week? I'm not sure. There's no coffee made. There's nobody at the door greeting the new guy that winds up in Alcoholics Anonymous, or gal. And then someone grabs it and hands out a reading to Mason and a reading to Sean, and we get this meeting started, and then they go, does anybody have an issue they want to talk about? Now, I love AA. I love us. I love our people. But we've now put the success of the meeting in the hand of some newcomers who may or may not even know what Alcoholics Anonymous is. And so the format that was given to us is you can influence the success and the focus of a meeting. And this is what you do. This is what we did. This is not what you do. This is what we did. My sponsor, part of our lineage is we read 2 pages of the big book every day. I'm not so great at that anymore. I read a lot of other stuff now. But And so I said, why don't we start the meeting off with reading 2 pages of the big book? And then he said, get somebody to chair the meeting, which is kind of what in Maryland, our basic format was someone would lead the meeting. They'd give a 15 or 20-minute talk on a topic, and that topic is the meeting, which gives you a good chance to have a good meeting. But you can influence that even greater by saying, okay, we're only going to ask people to lead our meeting, speak at our meeting, whatever vernacular you like, that have actually taken the 12 steps out of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And so our speaker getter is charged with that. We rotate every 3 months, so they got 12 slots to fill. And you, before you take that job, you have to be willing to say to somebody, oh, I loved what Mark said at that meeting. Let's get Mark to do it. Well, that could have been an accident, right? And so it's his job to go to Mark if he doesn't know and say, hey, man, have you taken the 12 steps out of the book? And if Mark says yes, then you ask him to come. If Mark says, no, I'm just on my second step right now, awesome. We don't ask him to share with the group for an hour. And I'm telling you, we've only been 2.5 years. Paul and Lisa are in our group, and as I said, Lauren and Justin were part of starting that group. And I'm telling you, so 2.5 years, that's 125 meetings. We have not had a crappy meeting yet. I'm telling you. We had one time the guy didn't really know the format and he went way too long, but whatever. His message was solid. Nobody left there wondering what Alcoholics Anonymous was about. Not one time. 125 meetings, we have not had a bad meeting. Not because we're brain surgeons, just because we were shared the format of how to have a good meeting. And so the difference between a home group member and a frequent meeting attender is long-term sobriety and not. I'm just telling you, right? Am I just going to be when I show up at a meeting and that I'm only a member of one home group, when I show up at a meeting and it's not my home group, I try to be of service and say hello to any new guys. Of course, I'm an AA member first. Let's get that straight. But I'm not as concerned about are their floors clean. I'm not as worried about is the coffee made. I'm not worried about the format. I'm not worried about is the rent paid. I'm just not. You can only be invested in one group. You get one vote in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know about in this area, but when the Plain Language Big Book came out, there was quite a little uproar with some of the old crusty old dudes. Y'all got any crusty old timers around here? Oh, all complaining about the Plain Language Big Book was going to tear down Alcoholics Anonymous and water down all this shit stuff. But yet, they weren't a part of groups that elected GSRs, that sent GSRs to the area assembly to influence with their delegate an appropriate vote. If you're not a part of a group that has a GSR, so every home group in Hopes has one member, a GSR, that they send to the area. This is Area 64. Tennessee is all Area 64. And so every group, we hope, sends one member there that gets to vote on important stuff, right? I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't happen by accident. Now, the meetings are painful. It's brutally redundant, awful business of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just telling you, but it has to be done. But when a group doesn't send somebody, if meetings don't have GSRs, groups have GSR, and the GSR has the authority to vote for the group, and they come back and report to the group, hey, this is what's going on in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I hear all these old crusty dudes complain, and their meeting doesn't have a GSR. It's like complaining about the election in November and not voting, right? Like shut your mouth. The condition of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, to me today, as I'm sure that was awful out of high horse there, and I didn't mean it, but it's so passionate to me because I've fortunate enough to live both lives. Just the meeting makers make it guy. That's what they told me in treatment. Meeting makers make it. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Paul, maybe it was Mark. It's probably Mark. Somebody said, well, what they really meant by that was that the people who make meetings will make it, or the people who start meetings will make it. In the treatment center, what they're saying is if you go to a lot of meetings, you'll stay sober. And Alcoholics Anonymous is not don't drink, go to meetings. That's a part of the deal, right? We're not going to make any spiritual progress without not drinking. And we need the meetings to make it happen. We need the fellowship to make it happen. But Alcoholics Anonymous is the 12 steps. It says, here are the steps we took, which are program of recovery. What time did we start? Oh, thank you. So I get 36 more? No. Unity is so vital to me because, and so the home group's part of it, right? And I have a responsibility as a home group member to serve that guy on the margins, right? Richard Rohr talks about loving the guy on the margins. I don't go to my home group to hang out with my homeboys and talk about Alabama football as much as I would like to. That's not the purpose, right? Now that happens. It does happen by accident sometimes, right? But what I'm really called to do is to get to my meeting early, help set up, not get there 5 minutes before, although that's happened, and find the guy that's sitting in the back that has FU tattooed on his eyelids. He's got his arms crossed. He's 4 days out of prison, and he's thinking, I got to go to these GD, AA meetings again. It's my job to get that guy into the circle. And I think that's what all of our jobs is. Because, and what our group does also is we're in service in treatment. We're in service in the prison. We carry the message, right? Like Renee talked beautifully about how things used to be in AA. And that's, I'm not saying that mockingly, but I used to mock old timers for talking like that. But the 12-step call of AA has changed dramatically, and crying over it is not going to change it. The treatment field has changed Alcoholics Anonymous. The internet has changed Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery. Somebody needs to get sober. What do? It's just the first time. They don't know anybody in recovery. Let's just say there's that rare person. I don't know anybody in recovery. I don't know what to do. I don't go to church. I need to stop drinking or she's going to throw me out. What do? Google. So you Google, how do I quit drinking? Or maybe somebody said, hey, go to the A&A, and you don't know what that means. You're not quite ready to go to treatment yet. She hasn't put you out. And so you Google it, and then we're all savvy with the internet. You figure, all right, the 3 Legacy groups meets in Lebanon, 7:30, and they show up unannounced, certainly invited, but unannounced. They don't know anybody. And so, if you're restless, irritable, and discontent, as I am early in recovery, or if you're itchy, bitchy, and twitchy, I'm not looking to embrace the guy at the door. I'm not looking for a greeter. I'm not looking to, I just want my old lady to get off my back. I just want to get my job back. I just want to get back in the big bed. So I come in, it says, okay, meeting's at 7:30, so I'm going to pull up at 7:28, maybe 7:29. If I'm there at 7:27, I am waiting in the car. You know what I'm saying? I am, and I'm going to do my best to sneak in, figure out what the A&A is about, and get the F out of there as quickly as I can, and go home and report to my girl, I'm in AA. And we allow that to happen. It's probably happened this morning that someone is, maybe not this morning because they didn't know about this, but it's happened in this clubhouse. It's happened in every meeting, in Alcoholics Anonymous. A guy comes in, a gal comes in. How many people have come into our meeting instead of our group and have left and have no idea what Alcoholics Anonymous is about, And so that's what I'm charged to do. And that's what having a home group is about, is that so when someone says, hey, where do I go? I know where to send them. Because I can't say, oh, well, I'll meet with them. I mean, I am supposed to do that, but I can't do that always, right? I got to have a network of people around me. I got to be a part of a club, right? Like, imagine, let's just say you're lucky enough to be an Alabama football fan. And every weekend you watch the game and you just have a great time because you have 18 national championships. And every now and again you get to go down to Bryant-Denny Field. Every now and again, and you're there early and it's just awesome. And it's just an awesome experience to be a fan. You're a winner. 18, it's just, Nick Saban's your uncle. It's a great time, right? She knows. She's educated. She's got the jersey on. I mean, the sweater on. And so, but you might not stay a fan forever. You might not, right? Like, they could do something you don't like. Follow the logic here. I love analogies. You might not stay a fan forever. They could suck for 20 years straight, and you divorce them. You could move towns and slowly fall in love with a new team. It could happen. But then let's say a little different scenario. So you're a fan since a kid, and you go to games, and you go to the game and you get there early, and then some guy on the field says, hey, man, we're a little short-handed today. Can you come out on the field and hold a flag while they run through the tunnel? Damn straight, I'll do that. And so you're out there holding the flag, and the team runs through, and they're like, all right, thank you very much. And the guy's like, man, we really liked you. Why don't you come back next week, and we'll give you something else to do. And you show up next week, and they're like, listen, all the tables over there with the cups of water, the guy didn't show up. Can you fill up all the cups with water? And you're like, damn straight I will. Roll Tide. And you're there, and you're filling up the water, and handing Nick Saban a cup of water, right? This is a good deal, right? And then after a little while, they're like, hey, why don't you help us clean up afterwards and pack up the locker room? We gotta go down to Georgia and kick some butt, right? And he's like, all right, I'll pack up the locker, and you do that. And they're like, hey, why don't you come with us? And you say, shit. They say, get in the car. And you're like, all right, get in the car. You get in the team bus, you go down to Georgia, and you help set up, and you whoop up on Georgia, right? Imagine you get to have that experience. You will never be a fan of a different team. You've now gone from a fan to this is my team. And instead of talking trash about Alabama did this, Alabama did that, you start using the vernacular, we. Yeah, we beat up on Georgia. That's right, we did. You don't say Alabama whooped them up, right? You say we did. And that's the difference in Alcoholics Anonymous. Do you want to be on the field playing the game, waving the flags? Not waving the flags, I didn't say that correctly. Waving the flags, filling the cups of water, giving high fives to everybody, right? That's the difference. Totally difference between being a member of a home group. And so if you're not a member of a home group, get with your sponsor and say, hey, the meetings we've been going to suck. That's okay. Create your own. And you don't need 30 people to do it, but, and so in Lebanon, we were lucky enough, there was a bunch of people that had moved to town that had that same experience of being part of a strong group. And they wanted to be a part of a group, and just by, God's grace, a bunch of us got together and started a group, and we met ahead of time, didn't have a meeting ahead of time, we met ahead of time, an AA meeting, we had an organizational meeting ahead of time, and said, hey, what do we want our group to be like? First, we got to get on that page, right? What do we want our group to be like? All right, we want to be a solid 3 legacy group. We want to use service, unity, and recovery to keep our group strong as our guiding principles. All right, then so we had enough people to do it, and you're willing to take a job, you're willing to take a job. We had enough people that are willing to do some work, and it's like, all right, what night do we want to do this? Well, there's a lot of meetings in the area, and we don't want to step on any toes, right? The traditions talk about consult the other groups in the area to make sure you're not, there's already 3 groups on Tuesday at 6. You don't want to start a group Tuesday at 6. So we found a slot, that's why we have a 7:30 slot, because there were some 6 o'clock meetings. We didn't want to offend anybody. We wanted to include them, part of unity. And our first meeting, we had, 40, 50 people. And the next week we had 60, 70 people. And every Tuesday night we have 80 people. And I'm telling you, you can't come there and have a bad meeting. And if you come there as a new person, you're going to be greeted out front. We have a male and female greeter, right? We have a annual, we're getting ready to do our second one. We have an annual group inventory. A healthy group does a group inventory. And we've put these out here. Please take them in AA group. There's a suggested list of 20 groups, how my group is doing. Not how John's doing, how is this group doing? And so you get together as a group once a year and you ask yourself the question, how are we carrying the message to the newcomer? How are we carrying the message to the professional community? Are we reaching doctors and lawyers and judges? Are people being sent here? Is our group safe? Do women feel safe here? Do minorities feel welcome here? All that stuff. You got to ask yourself those questions to be a healthy group. And the reason why a healthy group is so important, and the reason why it's tied to unity, is because God speaks to me in 90 degrees. God speaks to me through you. God does not send the messages in the clouds, John, go left. John, do this, don't do that, right? I hear it from you guys. I cannot stay sober without you guys. 36 years sober, I needed it as much as no more, no less, as much as the day I got here, I needed you guys. I still have a sponsor, you know. Why? Because I don't know how to stay sober 37 years. I got a pretty good idea, but I haven't had that experience. You know, there's things in life that he's going through now that he'll one day, hopefully, will walk me through. You know, sponsorship is, I'm going to talk a little bit about sponsorship and then turn over to Renee to talk about service to close us out, because I'm kind of talking about all those different things. But sponsorship to me is the greatest blessing of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is monkey see, monkey do stuff. Find some guy or some gal that's farther down the path. You say, hey, how did you get down there? How did you, as Renee said, how did you get through that divorce sober? How did you get through that child custody sober? How did you get your kids back sober? How did you get your first job sober? Whatever it is, you know, how did you overcome these things sober? How did you do this stuff? Will you show me? And they say, yeah, you know, not a financial advisor, not a marriage counselor, career coach, none of that nonsense. You know, how did you recover from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body? How did you do that? How do you, you know, because I watch people, you know, we're all watchers. And I would watch my sponsor. He would come into the room and he would look at people in the eye. He did crazy stuff like open his mail. He would answer the phone no matter who called. That's dangerous, you know. When I go to meet somebody, I look at my shoes. Okay, that's what I brought to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he didn't do any of those things. How do you live like that? Now, I couldn't quantify that at the time. How do you go to sleep at night without listening to an AA speaker for the 800th time just to fall asleep? Because I can't turn this off. You know, how do you do that? And just do what he does. Now, there's a way, just like there's a way to find a good group, there's a way to find a good sponsor. You know, find somebody that has taken the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that has a sponsor, because that means they know where the solution is. Find somebody that has a sponsor. My sponsor is 42 years sober, and he has a sponsor. I do not want a guy guiding me who is done having a guide. Find a guy that's in service. I don't need a used to be sponsor. I get to run my mouth a lot in AA, and you know, a lot of times there's a thank you line. Not very often when I speak, but sometimes there's a thank you line. And some old crusty dude will come up to me and say, oh man, I love what you said. I used to sponsor guys. I used to go to the prison. I used to go to the rehabs. I loved it. I used to. And I always want to say, one day I'm going to say it. I want to say, I bet you used to be pretty happy too. You know, like, we desperately need those guys. So find a guy that still has a sponsor, that's still in service, and find a guy that's enjoying life. Find a guy that's enjoying life and willing to tell you the truth. Those 5 things. And just surrender your recovery process to them, not your life to them. Don't give me your checkbook, right? But I am going to use your judgment when it comes to my recovery decisions, not mine. And then find some idiot that's silly enough to think that you might be able to show them the way. And that's how you do it, right? You know, and you walk them through this deal. You know, what we do here is, I've been lucky enough to sponsor Paul for a couple of years. My job was not to introduce Paul to my God, right? My job is and was to introduce Paul to the steps that lead you to have your own experience with your own higher power, right? That's what our job is to do. We're not here to manage each other's lives. Matt said this earlier that takes me back to the favorite story I like to tell about early recovery, of somebody reaching their hand out to me. Well, I'm going to tell kind of 2 stories. It's a story and a half. At about, 10 or 15 years sober, I got asked to lead a meeting in Maryland, for 15 minutes on the 12th step. And I got up there and I told this wonderful story about my first experience with the 12th step, when we picked up this guy wet off the street and took him to detox. And when we got back to the noon meeting the next day, the guy was already drunk, and I was really pissed off. And I shared that was my first experience with the 12th step. And I got in the car with my then sponsor, this guy Jimmy J, and I said, man, that was a really solid meeting, wasn't it? You know, I was looking for a little pat on the head. And it was a solid meeting. And I said, that was a really solid meeting, wasn't it? He says, yeah, it was a good meeting. He said, but your share was crap. And I said, what are you talking about? I mean, we should have recorded that for the next big book or something. What are you? And he said, your first experience with the 12-step was as a recipient. Don't ever forget that. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I didn't even say goodbye to him. I just got out the car. Like, I was probably crying, holding back the tears, like I was like, how did I forget that? And one of my favorite stories as a recipient is, so I told you I got thrown out of the Navy. I got sent back home. And I'm just like the loser's loser. I mean, not even the Navy will take me, And, I talk a lot to God. I make deals with God. God, I'll do this, you give me this. But preferably you give me this and then I'll do this. But I get dropped off at this meeting because I have no hoopty. And my mother drops me off. I'm staying at her place, not a good look when you're trying to get your next hostage. Hey, let's go back to my mom's place. And I'm like, this AA really sucks. It's not working for me. God, you better do something. And I was like, matter of fact, I might be done with this deal. It needs to happen tonight. Careful. And so there was this group of people at this AA club that were different than everybody else. There's about 8 of them. They had this glow about them. They looked at each other in the eyes. They embraced each other. They didn't beat each other's backs when they hugged. They told each other they loved them. They cried together. They meant it. They weren't perfect, but they were different than I was. And I really wanted all the cool young people had gone back to drinking. And they had this huge conversation every night after the meeting. Are we going to Denny's or are we going to Bob's Big Boy? For our younger friends, Bob's Big Boy used to be a big diner chain. That was their conversation every night. And I really wanted to go. I mean, I really wanted to go because moms sucked. And so I went over near them and I pretended to do a little service, straighten up the chairs, maybe clean up an ashtray. And I sent them telepathic messages to invite me. I mean, I may have even made eye contact, and nobody did. And so I rolled out of that clubhouse. I semi-slammed the door so they would notice. And I'm like, F it, I'm walking home. Not a good plan. My mom lives probably 7 or 8 miles away. And, but I was, full of so much self-pity and no spiritual solution. I'm just fellowshipping my backside off, and my fellowship had gone. And so as I got towards the corner, it was really decision time because if I am walking home, I got to go left. But all the cars went right out of this clubhouse. They all went right. It was just the most common path to where they were going. And so that last 200 yards, I slowed down so everybody could reconsider their selfishness. And lo and behold, I mean, I probably didn't even look like I was walking. It probably looked like, anyways. And lo and behold, Charles, that guy I told you about, my sponsor for 10 years, he stopped. He wasn't my sponsor at the time, but he stopped. And he had Rick in the car, and he rolled down the window, and he leaned over and said, hey, man, do you want to go to Denny's with us? And I was like, I was torn because I'm a little pissed they didn't ask me. But I know my life is on the line. I really did. I knew, don't say no, John. Just say, thank you, sir. Yes, thank you, sir. But I couldn't do it. My ego is returned. I got no reason to have my ego return at 18 months while I'm walking home, bumming cigarettes. Not much ego left there. But I had one. And I said, well, I don't have any money. And he said, seeing that you're walking, your financial position really wasn't in question. And that was the Maryland version of just get in the car. Just get in the GD car and shut your mouth and do it. He didn't say that. His aura just said that. Or maybe I made that up. But like everything, it's like our friend Larcene said to us a couple weekends ago, things just circle around the universe and drop in my head and I just accept them be truth with no reason. But no, I mean he had that way about him. Like he wasn't going to beg you. He wasn't like a counselor. He wasn't super lovey-dovey, but you knew he cared. And he just said, just looked at me like a game of silent chicken. I said, yeah, I'll go. And Rick got out of the car and they put me in the back of this 2-seater, which I'm not built for. Made me a little pissed. And I've got I think like a month more than Rick, so I should certainly be in the front seat. But they didn't honor that code of conduct and newcomer conduct, and they took me to this Denny's and put me in the middle of the booth, and we smoked coffee and smoked cigarettes and ate pancakes all night long, and I fell in by accident, by dumb accident, no merit involved, with a pocket of enthusiasm that was doing this deal, And so when you find that pocket of enthusiasm here, and it might be within a struggling meeting base, or it might be a home group that already exists, you just got to dive all the way in and just say, man, I'll do whatever y'all tell me to do, And I'm here to tell you, as I turn it over to Renee to close us out with the final 15 or 20 minutes, is if you come in here, no matter what your circumstances are, day 5, day 6, day 60, 6 years, everything's an absolute train wreck. If you absolutely surrender yourself to try to live by these spiritual principles, make mistakes, fall down, get back up, surrender again, make mistakes, fall down, break your leg, get back up, go to the hospital, surrender, surrender, surrender. If you can do that, if you just commit yourself, I am going to live by these spiritual principles, and you carry the message to a place that you don't want to go back to, prison, treatment, detox, rehab, you will have the most incredible life that you can't even imagine. I've been given a life that is one that I did not even know was possible. Thank God I did not get what I asked for when I got here. I didn't even know what I needed. But the old guys waited around long enough until I was ready to listen and ready to do some work. We do not shoot our wounded in here. And so, a lot of times in a home group, we get in a tiff with somebody and we say, oh, that's her shit, that's her problem. And we just let it be, or his stuff, and we just let it be. It's not our job. Our job is to be a peacemaker. Our job is to bring the group together to see what, So, Alcoholics Anonymous is the most beautiful group in the world, and I pray that you find a group. And if you don't find a group, make a group. It's available to all of us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renee to close us out.
Thank you, John. So I spent thousands of dollars in therapy to figure out. My therapist said, if you want John to get an idea, just give him an analogy. See how well he does analogies? That whole Alabama story. If you want him to hear you, just make up an analogy. 29 years we've been married. It all boils down to those 3 legacies, right? We have to be recovered first if I'm going to have any kind of relationship with anybody, because, I couldn't even have, my God fully in my life, a relationship with God when I was out there. I mean, I would come to in a church, and, in blackouts, I would come to in a church because I knew I was drawn to that, but I had no relationship if I'm drinking. I'm not uniting anything. I'm the whirling dervish drunk, causing ruckus wherever I go. And I'm not serving anyone but me, selfish and self-centeredness. The whole world revolved around me. And one of the old timers, I always say I came in on the shoulders of giants, stood at that door at the club and said, Renee, when you learn that the world doesn't revolve around you, you're going to be okay. And I was like, I didn't really even understand that, but I heard it. I heard it and I filed it away. And, when I turned out of self, and they said this a lot, out of self, out of self, out of self, just you call with whatever's going on. And my sponsor would say, out of self, and I did a lot of things that I didn't understand, but I just did them anyway. It didn't make sense, but I just did them anyway. One of the biggest things, I'm going to tell you a story to close us out, but one of the biggest gifts I've gotten in recovery, and I don't know, I'm sure the men the same way, I have, all of my relationships today are non-transactional. All I knew when I got here was transactional relationships. And every family, friends out there, we were going to have an exchange. I wasn't, this was transactional. I can promise you today, we've had some jokes that John and I, throughout the years about transaction, but I really don't want anything or need anything from anybody in my life. I'm called every morning to see how I can serve. serve God's kids. The highest we can get here, I was going to tell you all about the service manual and the concepts and all of that, but the highest thing we can do here is get to be a servant. That's the highest thing you can get here, to have a servant's heart and to serve God's kids. So we've had so many opportunities in so many different ways. My heart, God gives us special gifts that we're born with that just is easy, that we don't have to. It's just kind of the wiring God gives us. And we get sober and we figure out these ways that he uses us the best. I've always gone into the jail. I love going into the jail. I love a wet drunk. I love alcoholics, whether they're drunk or sober. I just have a deep love for them. I just want to lick their face when they're all stinky and nasty, and I just love it. And, it's a gift. I'm not the girl in the meeting going, oh my God, is she drunk? Oh God, let's get her out of here. No, that's not me. Where else are we supposed to go? But there's a story that really sums up what can happen to you here. So we're in that period of time, that 18 years, John's 18 years sober, I'm 15 years sober, and the wheels fall off. They're off. They are off. There's not an area, our house is in foreclosure. The cars are turned in. 2 of the kids had to be pulled out of their schools, sent to public school. It was, the poor girl didn't even know if she had worn a uniform her whole life. She's like, she was wearing my clothes to school. It was so pitiful. She didn't even know how to dress, to go to regular school. We had some growing pains. And, the IRS had garnished our accounts a couple times. I turned 40 that year. It was quite, and you talk about the pity party. I had every opportunity to just say, is this what I got sober for? Is this, I haven't, it was really tough. And John had fallen off a ladder, and he had, we were trying to save one of the businesses that he had, and he was up on a ladder, and he fell, and he broke his pelvis, and his arm was at like a 90-degree angle. And I remember showing up at that emergency room, looking at him shaking on that board, thinking, what, I looked up, and I remember thinking, that was like at the end of the run, and there was a lot more involved in that. The marriage, there was betrayal. I had a decision to make. Was I going to, forgive at a capacity that I had never forgiven and let God show me what I was supposed to do? And so I'm in this hospital, in this emergency room, and I'm looking at him, and all I can see is God's kids. God's kid just laying there, physically broken, spiritually broken. And I had a decision to make. Was I going to just let God to keep disclosing, or was I going to let my ego and my pride and the easier, softer way was to have been to walk away from all of that. And, God had a plan for us. And we'd gone through a lot of therapy. We did a lot of prayer. We spiritually connected in ways that we had, what that does is opens up for a new experience, something deeper than you can imagine if you do that. If you show up into a situation like that, totally stripped of everything, God will blow your socks off. I had never felt closer to my higher power. When the credit score was good, or there was enough money in retirement, all that thing, you think that will make you feel close and joyful and peaceful? No. When you're stripped of everything and you're standing in moments like that is where you feel God the most if you're awake. So we've gone through a lot of therapy, a lot of books. I read every book. I'm seeking, I'm sponsoring women. I'm doing all the deal. I'm doing everything. I'm doing all the stuff, just allowing God, to heal me every day. Heal me. And John calls. I'm waiting for one of my daughters to come home from college. My dad had gotten diagnosed with cancer, stage 4, and I'm driving home from Baltimore, taking him to see the oncologist. I got to go up and get my daughter from college. It's about an hour away from where we live. That's going on, and I'm thinking of all the things going on, and I'm just, John calls on the way home. I got this kid I'm going to bring up from Florida who needs help getting sober. Is that going to be okay? He's just going to stay a week or so. He's a son of a friend of mine that I met. I really fell in love with him. I just met him for a minute, but I love him, and I want to bring him up, to get sober, help him get sober. And I'm thinking to myself, I got to go get Brenna from school. My dad's got cancer. I don't know all the appointments I'm going to have to do. And like, I'm thinking, and I paused and I said, well, who am I to, maybe God, this is the way it's supposed to be. And little did I know he'd already bought the ticket. The kid was on his way. He's probably going to beat me to the house by the time I get home. But, I allow God, at that moment to show me what to do. So I called my sponsor, and she said, look, it's not the Pope. The basement's packed with stuff. All the kids bring stuff home. And look, just make a little path. He's been out on the streets. He's going to be fine. Just give him a little mattress on the floor. He'll be fine. Well, my friends come over. AA shows up. People like Lisa, and we clean, and Lauren, and we build the bed, and we get him a room, and he's ready to go. And this kid shows up with a backpack, with his dad's shoes on. Nothing. We're running to Target to get toothpaste and toothbrushes. And my kids are going in their closet to give him some sweat clothes. He's from Florida. He's freezing up there. And my family falls in love with this kid. And I told you about that reconstructive period where, we're going to therapy to, there's a part of my heart that was broken physically, like felt broken from all of that. And this kid, falling in love with him, healed that last piece that I thought was going to come from a therapy session or a book or, something, a step work or something. And it came from opening my home and my heart to a stranger. And my children will tell you, my 3 kids are adults now, will tell you how special that year was for them. He stayed a year, by the way, not just a week. Got a job. Details. Got a sober life, playing sober softball, had his own AA friends, had his own sober life, and he was just a part of the family, and I would have cheated myself if I had said to myself, or if my sponsor said, oh yeah, Renee, you're right, it's about balance, right? Like I hear this all the time, I need balance. Well, if she had said that to me, I would have called him and said, no, I got too much going on, this is... I got to focus on me and my needs, and it's a little too much and inconvenient. I find that when it's inconvenient, or I think, that's me relying on my own power, that's me easing God out, and I'm going to miss the opportunity. So how that showed up for me was not what I would have thought, was not the way I thought it was going to be. And I would have cheated myself. I would have cheated my family. I would have cheated so many things, if I hold on to those old ideas. So no, it wasn't, I had every, there were a lot of sponsors that would have said, Renee, you got this and this and this, you need balance in your life, and I'm so grateful I don't have a sponsor like that. I have a sponsor that says, let's discern, let's get quiet and ask God. And if I show up with a servant's heart, he's going to heal those things in ways that I don't even know. My brain is only so big. So that service is going to show up in a way that you might not recognize. That's why sponsorship is so important. I have a sponsor that has a sponsor that has a sponsor, and I got to go to my first international. I'm 33 years sober. I'd never been to an international conference, and I got to go this year. And I had all the way up, I have a picture of all the way up my lineage before Chuck C., before Bill W. And I got to be with all of them and feel what that felt like, And Chuck C. used to talk about in his book, A New Pair of Glasses, it's the little things. He had given a talk that he met this guy when he gave a talk at this convention or this place, and he met the guy had a day or something like that, and a year later he's back at the same place, and the guy said, hey, I got a year, and I'm, and Chuck's thinking something he said, and whatever, and he goes, what do you think, and he goes, what it was? And Chuck's thinking about something he said, maybe a big story he gave, and he said, I was there, and I was shaking so bad I couldn't light a cigarette, and this little old lady pulled out a lighter and lit his cigarette. And the magic was in that little old lady lighting a cigarette, not something profound from the podium. It's those little acts, it's those little things that matter, and so those are the things that I look out for today. Those service, it doesn't have to be a category or in a pamphlet. Just taking the time to look someone in the eye that, is just scared to death and doesn't know what's going on. Those are the things that can be profound and matter. There was a guy that was getting sober at the 5:30 meeting in Frederick. And I remember him coming to every meeting because he had nowhere else to go. The wife left with the kids and he had nothing. He was stripped down. Pittsburgh Steve. He had nothing. And I said, you might just make it. I looked at him, I said, you might just make it. And I pointed him in the direction to a guy that would be a good sponsor for him. And he grabbed on and he got sober. And years and years and years later, we run into this woman who says to John or I or both of us, I don't know where we were, but we ran into his sister, cousin, who had been sober for years and stuff. And she thanked us, she said, thank you so much. You helped save my cousin's life. He used to go to your house at that big book study, and he talked about, what it was like there and how it helped him and stuff like that. So you never know. Just keep waking up every day trying to serve his kids, and you're going to see a ripple effect that you can't even imagine. You can't even imagine it. And it just goes on and on and on and on. So while I'm still here, while I'm, I still have, I've never lived, tomorrow's going to come and I've never lived tomorrow before. So I need to be tied to the deck. I'm going to keep calling my sponsor. I'm going to keep dragging whoever else wants to come along on the ride behind me, next to me. I always say shoulder to shoulder. It's not behind, it's shoulder. We do this thing together, shoulder to shoulder. And I'm just going to be grateful for this time with you guys, and hopefully our paths will cross again. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you for letting us be with you guys this weekend. We invited God to join us, as my sponsor would say, and I think he did. So let's close with a moment of silence and the Lord's Prayer.